My name is Mabel Whitmore. I'm 77 years old, and I live alone in a modest coastal home in Rockport, Maine. It's the kind of place people visit on weekends: calm, salty air, cedar shingles, and seagulls crying overhead. But for me, this house is more than scenery. It's memory. It's history. It's everything. My husband, Harold, chose this house nearly 40 years ago. We had dreams of retiring here, growing old in rocking chairs side by side. And for a while we did. He passed away 6 years ago, quietly with my hand in his. I stayed because I couldn't imagine being anywhere else. I'm not rich. I live off Harold's pension and my own small teacher's retirement fund. I don't go on vacations, I don't drive a luxury car, and I certainly don't throw dinner parties. But I have peace. Or at least I thought I did. Then my son, Grant, started calling more often. He'd never been much of a caller. Busy with work, busy with life, always moving. But now, suddenly he and his second wife, Tessa, seemed very interested in how I was doing. Too interested. They'd ask if I was lonely, if I was eating well, if I ever got confused during the day. At first, I took it as care. But then they came to visit, and that's when the first crack in the glass appeared. Grant stood in my kitchen that morning, looking around like he didn't recognize the place. Tessa perched on a stool, smiling too hard. "You know, Mom," Grant said, sipping coffee he didn't like, "we've been thinking maybe it's time you considered moving into one of those beautiful assisted living communities. Just until things get a little easier." I smiled, but inside, something twisted. I had no idea then that this visit would be the beginning of a betrayal I wouldn't wish on any mother. The visit that started with fake smiles quickly shifted into something colder. Over the next few days, Grant and Tessa moved through my home like realtors, not family. They opened drawers, peeked into closets, whispered in the hallway when they thought I was napping. By the third morning, over breakfast, Grant brought it up again. "Mom, have you heard of Silver Pines?" he asked casually, like he was recommending a restaurant. Tessa chimed in, "It's just 20 minutes away, and the place is lovely gardens, walking paths, a library. They even have watercolor classes every Thursday." She said it like I was already packed. I set down my spoon and looked at them. I'm not going anywhere. They didn't say much after that, but I felt the tension hang in the air like mist. When they left that afternoon, Tessa hugged me tightly and whispered, "Don't worry. We'll take care of everything." That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window, watching the light from the lighthouse flicker in the distance, and something inside me began to churn. I didn't understand why they were pushing so hard. Not yet. A week later, a man came to my door, said he was from Elder Services and needed to do a wellness check. Apparently, someone had anonymously reported that I might not be taking care of myself. I let him in. He looked around, asked questions, even peeked into my fridge. When he left, he said, "You seem perfectly fine, Mom. Take care now." But that wasn't the end. Another week passed. Then came the letter, official, legal, stamped. My son Grant had filed for temporary guardianship. In the documents, it claimed I was showing signs of dementia, that I was prone to confusion, and that I'd recently left the stove on for hours, a lie. I remember sitting in my reading chair, the letter trembling in my hand, heart racing in disbelief. He said I was unfit to manage my own affairs, that I needed help, and worse, that he would be the one to provide it. I called him immediately. "Grant," I said, trying to stay calm, "what is this?" He sighed like I was exhausting him. "Mom, please. This is for your own good. You're not thinking clearly anymore. You could get hurt. And frankly, the house is too much for you." I felt like I was sinking. The worst part wasn't the paperwork. It wasn't the false accusations. It was the voice of my only child treating me like a problem to be managed, not a person to be loved. That's when I knew this wasn't concern. It was calculation. And I was done pretending I didn't see it. After that call, I didn't hear from Grant for a few days. But I knew he wasn't done. Something in his voice told me this wasn't just about worry or stress. This was planned. And when someone tries to make you feel like you're crazy, you start paying attention to the small things. I checked my mail every day, watched my bank statements. I even went to the town office to request a copy of any property-related inquiries tied to my home. And there it was. An application had been submitted in my name, supposedly signed by me, stating my intent to transfer ownership of the house into a family trust managed by Grant. The signature wasn't mine. It didn't even look close, but it was enough to freeze my gut. I drove straight home. My hands shook the whole way. That night, I called an old friend, Edna, who'd worked in the county clerk's office for nearly 30 years. She was retired now, living out in Belfast, but she still had connections. When I told her what had happened, she went quiet for a long time. Then she said, "You need help, Mabel. Real help." She gave me a name, Nathan Connors, a retired investigator who now worked part-time helping older folks deal with legal fraud, especially within families. The next morning, I met with Nathan at a quiet cafe. He looked like a man who had seen too much gray hair, calm eyes, no unnecessary words. I brought everything I had, the letter from Elder Services, the fake application, even my journal where I documented what Grant and Tessa had said during their visit. He listened carefully, never interrupted. Then he leaned back in his chair and said, "He's not just trying to move you into a home. He's trying to take the house before you know it's gone." It hit me like a slap. Nathan explained the pattern: adult children manipulating the legal system to declare their parents incompetent, gain control of their assets, and then flip the property before the parent even realized what had happened. It was more common than I ever imagined. "But they can't do that," I said. "I'm not incompetent. I've never even missed a payment. I volunteer, I garden, I read." Nathan nodded. "That's why we're going to stop this before it goes further. But we have to move fast." He recommended a lawyer, someone who specialized in elder defense and property rights. Her name was Marla Reyes. Sharp, brilliant, no nonsense. I called her that afternoon. By the next day, we had started the legal process to challenge the guardianship claim. That same evening, Nathan handed me a small voice recorder. "If he calls you again, record everything," he said. "And don't tell him anything has changed." I tucked it into my knitting basket. The battle had begun. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like a scared old woman. I felt like someone who still had fight in her. In the weeks that followed, everything changed, but not on the surface. I still drank tea by the window every morning, still walked to the post office on Tuesdays, still waved at my neighbors like nothing was wrong. But underneath that calm exterior, I was gathering ammunition, quietly, carefully. Nathan came by every few days. Sometimes we'd sit outside with coffee, looking like two retirees discussing crossword puzzles. But behind the laughter, we were reviewing documents, building timelines and planning. Marla, my attorney, moved fast. She filed a formal objection to the guardianship petition, attaching medical evaluations from my doctor, testimony from my neighbors, and letters from the library and food bank, where I still volunteered. It was a wall of proof that I was perfectly capable of living my life. Still, we all knew Grant wasn't going to back down easily. Then one afternoon, I got a call. "Hey, Mom," Grant said, all smooth and sweet. "How's everything going?" I flipped the recorder on. "Oh, just fine," I said, smiling into the silence. "Still here, still kicking." "That's great," he replied, then hesitated. "Listen, about that paperwork, I didn't mean to upset you. I just think it's time to make sure everything's in order. For the family, you know? You always said you wanted to leave something behind." I let him talk. The more he said, the more he revealed. He talked about maximizing the property value, about not letting assets go to waste. He mentioned Tessa's cousin who just happened to work in real estate and a buyer who was very interested in homes like mine. He never asked how I was feeling, never asked what I wanted. When he finally hung up, I saved the recording and sent it straight to Marla. 2 days later, she called me, furious but composed. They've already signed a preliminary agreement with a realtor. They're trying to flip this house before the court hearing even happens. I stood in the middle of my kitchen, the place where I'd cooked every Thanksgiving dinner for 30 years, and felt a wave of heat rise in my chest. They had moved from suggestion to deception, and now to theft. But they hadn't expected me to be ready. Marla filed an emergency injunction to freeze all transactions related to the property. The court granted it, just in time. Nathan helped me gather further evidence, documents, emails, call logs, even a voicemail from Tessa complaining that this would all be easier if your mom wasn't so stubborn. They underestimated me because of my age. But being old doesn't mean being weak. It means you've survived too much to be fooled easily. It means you've seen patterns before others do. And it means you know how to stand your ground even when no one else believes you can. The court date was set. I had 2 weeks. And I was ready. The morning of the hearing, I dressed with intention. Not to impress, not to intimidate, but to remind myself of who I was. I wore a navy blue coat my late husband had given me on our 25th anniversary, a string of pearls my mother passed down, and a pair of low-heeled shoes that had carried me through 3 decades of PTA meetings, weddings, and funerals. Nathan picked me up at 8:30 sharp. We didn't speak much on the way. Just sat in the quiet, letting the sound of the road hold space for what was coming. The courthouse was modest, just a brick building with peeling white columns and a cold tile floor. But when I walked inside, I stood tall. Because this wasn't just about me anymore. It was about every parent who had ever been told they were no longer needed, no longer trusted, no longer worthy of their own life. Marla was already there, papers in hand, sharp as ever. She gave me a reassuring nod. "You're going to be fine, Mabel. Just tell the truth." When the judge entered and we were called up, Grant was sitting across the aisle. He looked polished, confident. Tessa sat beside him, flipping through her phone like this was an errand she needed to get through. Grant's lawyer opened with a dramatic performance painting me as a confused, lonely woman, vulnerable to falls and forgetfulness. He spoke about safety, about responsibility, about how my son was only trying to protect me. And then it was my turn. Marla walked me through each question, her tone gentle but firm. I explained my routine, my responsibilities, my independence. I described the day the Elder Services agent came to my home and how he found no cause for concern. Then Marla played the recording. The courtroom went silent. They heard Grant's voice talking about maximizing property value, working with a realtor, and flipping the house before I even knew what was happening. They heard the condescension in his tone, the manipulation behind the words. Then came the documents, the forged signature, the transfer application, the timeline of calls and emails. The picture became clear. It wasn't care, it was control. It wasn't concern, it was profit. The judge looked over her glasses, voice calm but unshakable. This court sees no evidence of cognitive impairment or inability to care for oneself. In fact, Ms. Carter has presented a compelling case of attempted financial exploitation under the guise of guardianship. She paused. The petition for guardianship is denied. Furthermore, any future attempt to pursue guardianship without clear and compelling new evidence may result in legal consequences for the petitioner. I didn't cry. Not in that moment. I just exhaled, slowly, deeply. After the hearing, Grant tried to approach me in the hallway. Tessa stood back, arms crossed, watching it all fall apart. "Mom," he said, softer than I'd heard in weeks, "can we just talk?" I looked him in the eye. "You had your chance to talk, you chose to take, and now, you can go." He looked stunned. Maybe for the first time he realized I wasn't the woman he could push aside. Nathan walked me out to the car. The sun was brighter than I remembered. The sky wide and blue. And for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. But I wasn't done yet. Because it wasn't just about protecting what I had. It was time to rebuild what they tried to break. Life didn't snap back to normal after the court hearing. It shifted quietly, gradually but with weight. The kind of shift you feel in your bones, like the tide changing. I spent the next week walking through every room in my house, touching the things I had almost lost. The framed photo of Harold by the fireplace, the quilt my students gave me the year I retired, the sea glass bowl I kept by the window, small things, simple things. But each one whispered, "You stayed. You held on." I had my locks changed. I installed a camera at the front door, not because I expected trouble, but because it felt good to take control. I canceled the power of attorney I had once given Grant. I updated my will, leaving clear instructions with Marla, with one very specific clause. No individual who has attempted guardianship without consent or demonstrated coercive behavior shall have any access to property or authority over personal affairs. Clear, unshakable. Nathan helped me donate a few things I no longer needed. He even helped me set up a small herb garden out back, something Harold had always wanted but never got around to. I found comfort in the smell of basil, in dirt under my nails, in the steady rhythm of planting something that might outlive me. Word got around town. People I hadn't seen in months began stopping by. Good for you, Mabel, the librarian whispered as she checked out my books. You're stronger than most, said Doris, my old neighbor, who brought over a jar of homemade strawberry jam. And for the first time I started believing them. I wasn't just a woman who survived a betrayal. I was a woman who reclaimed her space, who said no, firmly and without guilt, who showed others, especially women my age, that it's never too late to draw the line. Grant and Tessa didn't come around anymore. They sent a few awkward emails, thinly veiled apologies mixed with passive-aggressive phrases like misunderstanding, and we only wanted what's best. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Because sometimes silence is its own form of closure. I made peace not by fixing them, but by choosing myself. One day, Nathan came by with an envelope. Thought you might like this, he said, smiling. It was a photo he'd taken of me in the courtroom hallway, just after the hearing. I was looking out the window, sunlight on my face, expression calm. You look like a woman who got her life back, he said. And he was right. Because I did. And no one, no matter how close they once were, would ever take that from me again. Looking back, the most painful part wasn't the betrayal itself. It was realizing how long I had ignored the signs, how easily I had explained away the small shifts, the clip tones, the way my voice no longer seemed to matter when decisions were being made about me. I raised Grant with love. I gave him my best years, my softest hands, my strongest prayers. And for a while, I thought that meant he would always protect me. But people change. Or maybe they reveal who they truly are when something valuable is on the line. And that's a lesson I want every viewer to carry with them. Love should never cost you your dignity. Family should never require silence. And age should never equal surrender. If you've ever felt pressured into stepping aside, into giving up your home, your choices, your independence, please know, you are not alone. You still matter. Your voice is still strong. And you have every right to protect what you've built. It took a courtroom, a lawyer, and a hard line in the sand for me to take back what was mine. But it started with something smaller. A moment of clarity. A quiet decision to stop apologizing for existing. To anyone watching who feels like they're being erased by their children, by in-laws, by people who claim to love them while trying to control them, I see you. I lived it. And I came out the other side. This wasn't just a legal win. It was an emotional one. A personal one. And a reminder that boundaries are not unkind, they are necessary. So today, I sit in the same house they tried to take from me. I sip my coffee on the porch Harold built with his own hands. I tend to my little garden. And I smile, not because everything is perfect, but because I stood my ground. Thank you for listening to my story. If it moved you, or reminded you of someone in your life, please like, share, or leave a comment below. Let's keep this conversation going for every mother, father, grandparent, and elder who deserves respect, not removal. Because sometimes the most powerful kind of revenge is simply choosing to stay and live.